Hello everyone, and welcome to this latest video discussion in the RICS Tech Partner Program series. My name is Andrew Knight. I've been with RICS for over 11 years now, and I sit within the regulatory standards and thought leadership part of the organisation. My role is to look at the impact of data and technology right across the built and natural environment, and with over 110,000 qualified members working worldwide, right across the property life cycle, from land through planning and development, construction, operations, brokerage, valuation, finance, end of life. There's clearly a huge impact of data and technology. Our members work across many different asset types: land itself, residential, commercial, alternative assets, and infrastructure. So once again, a very, very broad palette on which data and technology is having a very profound effect on the way the profession works. And today I'm really pleased to have Nick join me from Eos Group. So please do join me, Nick.
Hello, Andrew. Thanks for the invitation.
Pleasure to have you on the call. Now, before we get into the kind of the bits and bytes, as it were, Nick, it's always to get a bit of sort of human background here. So it'd be great to hear from you a bit about your sort of personal background and journey, and indeed the kind of origin story of Eos itself.
Oh, very good. So my roots are quite humble. I was born in a little village outside of Sparta, Greece. We're talking, 50 people. Running water in 1982, and so that picture sort of helps you understand where it started. And ended up in the U.S. in the D.C. area, Washington D.C. area, and worked for my father, who was a contractor, and then went to undergraduate and then graduate school, all in building construction. And so my roots are all in construction, and worked in the field and in the office for many years. And then ultimately, when I graduated, I decided that the technical strategy was a better one for me. It aligned and there were opportunities. It was very new in the construction space. And so I thought, this is something different. Let me pursue this and see how far I can get with it.
Indeed. And in terms of what Eos Group is doing in terms of solutions and services and kind of client profile, could you kind of summarize the kind of sector you're in, the kind of solutions you provide, and say the kind of people you're working with?
Sure. So we primarily focus on North America. However, our clients do take us across the world. In the North American space, we focus on the pre-construction phase of the project delivery process, right? So all the way from the initial conceptualization of a project up until the shovel hits the dirt, that's really our domain. And so we work with owners, federal agencies, Fortune 1000s, large asset owners. That's a big part of our business. Another dimension is the consulting engineer, design engineer, where they are providing services to owners, oftentimes in terms of preparing budgets and managing programs. And so they are also interested in our services. And then finally, contractors, the people that do the building, they are also interested in our services. But it's all around the pre-construction process, where we focus our attention, bidding or tendering, you might call it in other parts of the world. And so that's been our mainstay. And so half of the house, meaning the staff that we have, comes from that field, engineers, mechanical, structural, electrical, and so forth, project managers, estimators. And then the other half is the computer science, side of the house, where we build technology for our clients, we build technology for ourselves, we build technology for other vendors. And so they put their name on it. And so that's really been where we have focused as an organization.
No, and I suppose it's great to hear that sort of combination of technical domain knowledge in terms of the IT side, but also that domain knowledge from the construction side, because we so often find that's the blend we like to hear about, where people have got both of those domain strengths across their team. So given that you've obviously been in the space a fair time, could you perhaps talk us through the kind of timeline and evolution of how your project solution has evolved over the years?
Sure. So we get involved in many types of solutions. One of the things we discovered early on was that there was an opportunity to manage the estimating process itself. Most vendors focus on the calculator. How can I build a nicer calculator than Excel, let's say? but they don't really manage the process very well. So that's been a big part of our business. Another part of our business is data. We develop a lot of data for our clients in select markets. That's very unique. And then the third is what we call a project history type of solution, where we aggregate data for our clients to support internal benchmarking capabilities, to support conceptual estimating, to support estimate validation, trend analysis, things like that. And so that journey started back in 2001, where we recognized that there was an opportunity to start to aggregate data and use the collective data to help make better decisions, as opposed to simply building better calculators. At that time, there was the higher end companies, the bigger enterprises were exploring things like data warehousing and all that type of thing. The mid-market, small market just wasn't playing in that space at all very well. And so that was our first generation platform. That lasted us about 10 years, 9 to 10 years. And then we started over again. And that was our second generation platform that has lasted us about 7 or 8 years. And now we're building our third generation platform in that space. That'll take us hopefully, into the next 10 years or so. So it's been a long journey. At the beginning, we really had to preach about why you needed to do this. People would look at us and say, well, why is this important? I don't get it. We just want to build faster calculators. And we saw the opportunity of data and how data could help inform decisions and really help clients avoid catastrophic decisions by not learning from the past and things like that. Fast forward to today, we no longer have to preach. The idea of data and analysis and aggregation is something that is now relatively mature in the thinking of the market, less so in the implementation, but certainly we don't have to get in there and convince people that, hey, your data is valuable, you need to do something with it.
Indeed. I mean, on that kind of whole theme of that kind of use of project history, who do you now see using it, and how are they using it? And because it sounds like you've converted them, but who are the people that you converted, and how are they really kind of using it, getting in value out of it now?
Well, I would say we've converted the smart or clever few. How's that? It's still, it is one of those situations where when you speak to clients, they all know they should be doing this. The question is how many are doing it, right? So we all know we should eat better. We all know we should sleep more. Question is, are we eating better and are we sleeping more? That's a very different conversation. So they, the market now knows this, and they need to do this. Our owner operators, right, who manage assets, really are looking for capital efficiency. And so when you think about the term capital efficiency, how do I spend the money that I have in the most expeditious way to meet the company goals? So oftentimes the owner is trying to set an initial budget. They're trying to establish a baseline budget by which they can now start to solicit, guidance from, design engineers and consultants and so forth, and ultimately contractors who are going to give them a number that doesn't blow their budget out of the water, right? So otherwise, then you have to just go back around and ask for more money, and we filed wrong, we got it, missed it by a mile, that kind of thing. So they want to get better at that front end side of the process, but they also want to be able to validate the bids they're getting back, right? So we see a lot of owner operators use the technology to drive costs down, because they can sit across the table from the others and say, well, our experience for this type of element in this type of project over this time period looks like this. Why is yours 2x? Why is yours 3x of what we've experienced? If you can justify it, if the market has changed, if there are labor shortages, if there are commodity increases, show me why I should pay 3x. And if you can't defend that as a contractor, then you're going to drive, as an owner, be able to drive that price down. And we see a lot of owners save millions upon millions of dollars off of their portfolio every year, because they can lean into their historical data and at least have facts to back up their claims, as opposed to simply, I've been doing this for 25 years, I know the answer. Doesn't really work, right, all that well. So the design engineers are trying to provide early stage budgets to their clients, the owners. They're trying to do the same thing, get good at it, set expectations correctly. Again, they don't want to look foolish when they tell an owner this is a $50 million project and then the bids come in at $100 million. You know, that type of thing. That's an embarrassing thing because you are theoretically the cost consultant, right? You're the smart one that knows costs. And then finally, the contractors, you know, oftentimes they use it at early stages, right? So in essence, our contractor clients are constantly being asked to produce budgets, conceptual estimates, and that there's a significant cost in doing that. There's a significant cost in building a team, looking at an opportunity, pursuing the opportunity, spending tens to hundreds of hours of very expensive talent pursuing these opportunities. In some cases, they have to pursue these to keep the relationship. In some cases, they have to pursue these, you know, because they want to build a relationship. And so these are all expensive endeavors for these contractors. They want to try to set the right expectation early on when an owner comes and says, hey, Andrew, I need a number. I won't hold you to it, which of course they will, right? Here's my 3-sentence description. I'm about to walk into a meeting in 20 minutes. What should I say? Right? And so you, Andrew, the contractor, maybe the design engineer, you know, what do? Do you pull a number out of the air? Do you have the experience that you need to provide a credible answer? Do you have facts and data to support your answer to say, look, the range is this, right? This is all about probabilities. And so I can base my probabilities around my historical ranges and give you some credible answer that says, based on these 5 historical similar projects, you know, this is a reasonable budget to start off with. That's how people use the historical data.
I mean, do you see any challenges in the marketplace where people are perhaps only storing estimate history rather than actual costs and turnout? Is there a sort of a tension there between people just focusing on the kind of tender and estimates and not actually capturing actual costs as they go through the project?
Yeah. The tension is a nice word. It becomes almost a religious debate in organizations, right? You know, it's a philosophical debate. What is the right information to capture? And on one hand, you know, the easy answer is, well, you capture the actuals because that's what really happened, right? That's the accuracy of what happened in there. The problem with the actuals is that the data is captured at a very high level, right? And your estimating data is much more granular. And for contractors that are trying to say, some of our clients, for instance, they capture field production data, you know, man-hour installation rates for elevated flat work in this region. What is my production rate, you know, for this type of work, Southeast versus the Southwest? You know, now you're talking about very granular field data, you know, coming back to you. Where most organizations roll up numbers and say, okay, here's the concrete number. Well, what do I do with that, right? From a feedback loop, because sure, that gives me, you know, gross numbers, but I don't have the granularity that I need. And as you know, most organizations, you know, if you ask a field superintendent or a cost engineer in the field to track 10,000 codes, they're going to just throw up their hands and say that's not happening today, right? So there's this balancing act between the granularity upon which you're trying to capture the historical data and the effort to actually do that. So you have these challenges on the actual side, and I'll say this, for the most part, the industry really struggles with that. Really struggles with capturing granular actual cost data. We do have clients that do it. It's expensive. They are absolute leaders in the space by doing what they're doing, but the majority of the clients can't do that. However, on the flip side, you have your estimating data, and your estimating data is prepared by that estimating team. It's highly granular, it's highly predictive. There's a certain scope that they are basing that against. And so scope for cost, your estimating history is theoretically more granular and potentially, you know, more accurate in the sense that it's tied to that scope. Obviously, there are scope changes that occur as the project progresses, field changes, owner changes, and thus the initial scope doesn't match the final scope. And so you have this this disparity between, as I like to say, we estimate an orange, but we build an apple. Right, so we end up with these 2 different kinds of fruit, and we're trying to mesh them up, and it's a real challenge. A lot of it depends on who's consuming the data. You know, if it's an estimating team consuming the historical data, they have a pretty good idea of how the estimates came together, and they have a lot more data, right? Unless you're bat 1,000, as they say in the US, right? You may be winning 10% of the work you pursue, 20% of the work you pursue. So the volume of estimate history is going to be far greater than the volume of actual history, based on simply the win rate of what you pursue versus what you don't. So some clients we have, it's only estimate history. Some clients only capture actuals, some capture both. And it's a level of the maturity of the organization, the strategy that they pursue, the level of granularity, who the consumer of the information is. It is unique per client. And so, you know, we're built to go deep as an organization, as opposed to others that are built to sell a lot of technology to as many people as are willing to buy it. We're the inverse. We're a strategically small organization. Some would call us a boutique shop, in the sense that we're an inch wide and a mile deep, right? And so in that inch, we can go as deep as you need to go. But we're not trying to, you know, cover all aspects of what some of the bigger shops will do, which I appreciate what they're trying to do as well. It's a good thing.
So, I mean, Nick, how would you almost kind of summarize, if you step back and look at the sector, how deep is the adoption of this kind of project history kind of approach? You know, is it relatively well established, or is it quite fragmented? I suppose almost, you know, to some extent reflecting the nature of the sector.
It's quite fragmented. So normally what you see, so first and foremost, everyone has data, right? If you've been in business for a few years or a few decades, you have a ton of data, right? The question is, what are you doing about that ton of data? Are you treating it as an asset, or are you simply treating it as a byproduct of the work effort, right? So in essence, you just create this gold, and then you go to the edge of the cliff and you dump the gold over the edge, and then you start over again. And you do that over and over again, because you're just tossing that data right off the edge, because it's of no use for you, because you're not managing it, you're not aggregating it, it's not a strategic part of your business. And so you're effectively reinventing the wheel. But the organizations that don't subscribe to that and realize the value of the data that they're creating will help them make decisions, you know, better decisions in the future, they start to take action on this. And it always starts with a personal Excel workbook, what oftentimes is called a cheat sheet, right?
Yeah.
An estimator A has their history, an estimator B has their history, and all that kind of thing. And then they start passing the workbook around, and it starts to change. And then all of a sudden, the version that you have, Andrew, is different than I have. And so we're both looking at the same historical project, and we have two different numbers, right? And then business development has another database of project history, and their numbers don't match my numbers, right? And so all of a sudden we have multiple versions of the truth floating around. That's honestly, you know, the vast majority of the market. That's how the market sort of looks right there. And then eventually someone says, we need to put some structure to this, and they'll build, you know, an access database kind of thing, and maybe they'll get up to some type of, you know, higher end database to structure and all that kind of thing. And it's just sort of this maturation process, right? So it's back to that whole maturity model, right? Are you at level 0 on maturity, or are you at level 5 on maturity, right? And level 5 is a strategic initiative funded, you know, by the company, sanctioned by management with support, that says we're building an enterprise strategy around, you know, data, and here's how this fits into, our objectives, and you know, it's that range. The majority of the market is down at the 0 and the 1 level.
Yeah, indeed.
It still is.
So, I mean, Nick, you kind of alluded to that. You know, I always smile when I talk to a lot of tech partners about so much data still sitting on Excel in a very kind of inconsistent format. I mean, when we think about standards generally, and clearly there are lots of quite detailed classification and coding systems in your sector, how does your solution tie into those kind of various standards that, as you know, are very granular when people start estimating and looking at that bottom-up approach, and, you know, work breakdown structures and various coding systems? How do you sit within that kind of landscape?
Well, life would be a lot easier if everyone embraced the same standard, because then you could build your data architecture around that standard. And unfortunately, what we learned over the years was the standards vary, and organizations sometimes implement standards and then start to create derivatives of those standards of their own. Others invented something 50 years ago and have never changed, and so they still need that type of organizational structure, coding structure, code of accounts, LML structure, whatever it is. A lot of them need to see the data in multiple dimensions, meaning I need to see it by ICMS, right? Because that's one method of representation of the data. But then I have other clients that need to see it by NRM2 or something like that, right? Or master format or unit format, whatever it is. So we learned we could not predict the organizational structure that a client needed. And so therefore we had to build technology that was adaptable to these different structures, simultaneously validating the data that's being fed to the system so that non-conforming data can either be realigned with that structure or at a minimum notify the user that you now are trying to introduce data into the system that doesn't conform, do something about it. If you want to have that consistency in order to have the analytics, and all the wonderful graphics that go with the data and all that kind of thing.
Indeed. I mean, in many respects, I'm sure you'd agree, data and tech is not an end in itself, it's a means to an end. How would you summarize the kind of value that your clients are getting from implementing it? Because, they're in a very, margin tight environment in terms of costs and pricing. So they're clearly always looking for really pretty hard value whenever they implement something, aren't they?
Yes. So we know that our owners save millions in their portfolios in using the historical data to, basically keep the other side of the table honest. We know that we have contractor clients who can respond to opportunities with credible, defensible answers faster than their competition, because instead of having to spend days looking up historical data, trying to, this job is similar to the one that we did 5 years ago. Who was the estimator? Oh, that was Andrew. Where's Andrew? Andrew's in the Bahamas having a great time for this month. Okay, so now what do we do, right? Andrew's got the data somewhere. I don't know where it is, right? And so if I can't get a hold of Andrew, I may have to reinvent the data. That'll take me longer than if I can leverage the history and collect the history. The same way, if I have an organization that has multiple offices, perhaps even worldwide operations, how do I aggregate and leverage the collective knowledge of this organization then to empower others to make better decisions? And so for those that do that, and we have clients that have been with us now for 2 decades, they have tens of thousands of projects in their history systems, and they can leverage that in an instant and respond to an opportunity within hours, certainly days, where their competitors might take 2 weeks. Well, if I can get to that client within a day with a credible answer, and it takes you 2 weeks to get to that client, hey, we're on the golf course, right? We're having a good time. Before you even respond to that client, that game is over. You've already won that opportunity because you've built that relationship faster, and you've done so with credible, defensible data. That's the value proposition of Pursuit in order to get better numbers. Validation is a whole different story. Driving down costs. It's funny to see our clients. Sometimes our owners will pull up their history in our solution, and the contractor will pull up their history in our solution. And it's like the shock of, wait a minute, you're doing the same thing we're doing.
Now, Nick, you mentioned earlier that you almost described what you do as being narrow but deep, and I guess the implication of that, and it's a common theme, I think, when people are looking at various solutions to build an overall, set of a tech stack, to use the jargon. How do you fit your solution into that overall kind of data analytics tech stack to make sure that it's not just another silo? Because there's always that danger that people buy various bits off the shelf and end up with a whole set of systems that don't really then knit together and give them that, not so much a simple view because it'd be complex data, but that kind of integrated view.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll give credit to Microsoft here. One of the things that Microsoft does really well is they have a means by which to proliferate their technology across our space like no other organization. Really, really good at it. It's one of those things, for instance, Excel is everywhere. Sorry, it's just in everybody's, toolbox. They did the same thing with SharePoint, right? So SharePoint is now proliferated across the Microsoft stack. Everybody has it, and therefore you end up with thousands upon thousands of SharePoint sites that these organizations are, staring at now, all independent, all difficult to corral, the old herding cats in a pool kind of thing. Microsoft is doing the same thing with Power BI, and you see Power BI everywhere, right? And so all of a sudden the tool is there, and that becomes sort of the thing we're going to use because we already have it. Let's just use that for our enterprise data strategy and all that kind of thing. Where they sort of fall down is they give you the easy 80%, like SharePoint might give you the easy 80%, Power BI might give you the easy 80%, but then the other 80%, right? So the second 80%, the hard stuff is what is very difficult to do. And those platforms tend not to do very well with that. And so that's where we sort of step in and say, look, we'll do the heavy lifting in this portion of your data, analysis strategy, and then we'll feed that cleansed, normalized, sanctioned data into your enterprise system for other purposes. So this purpose-built analytical tool is serving a need that Power BI simply just cannot support. Yeah. It's a nice dashboard system, but it's not doing what this thing is doing. Yet you need some of that data in your broader enterprise solution. So you're going to use the broad enterprise solution for things like, safety and things like field prediction and all procurement and all kinds of analytics like that, but they aren't built for the cost history analytics that we have, purpose built the application. It can't be a silo, right? It can't be an island, but the estimating process, if you will, the sausage making process is an ugly process. It's a messy process. Nobody likes to see the sausage made, but they want the results of it. And so that's the part of the work that we do to cleanse it and bring it together. Whenever you get into that enterprise data strategy or historical data strategy, you think that the answer is, throw the data into a single database and throw a visualization tool on top of it. That's actually the easy part. The visualization of the data is actually, very, very much available. The hard part is getting the cleansed, normalized, standardized data structured into this so that you can get the metrics out of the system that you want, that the metrics are predictable, that they come through the way that you need them to on a consistent basis. That's the heavy lifting that people skip over and go right to the technical solution, and they've missed the boat. So we see a lot of that, just start up and then fail. We had one client that spent 12 years just going through the same thing. They did it with Cognos, they did it with Tableau, they did it with Power BI. Okay, you're still pursuing this from a tool perspective. You've missed the boat on the data strategy and the planning and the effort that it takes to make this thing successful. And millions of dollars later, in a decade plus, they still don't have a solution because they keep trying to do the same thing over and over again.
So, Nick, on that theme, it almost becomes a cliche when I talk to tech partners, but based on that last comment, what sort of insights and observations have you discovered from working with clients? Because that's clearly a very informative way of helping you understand the market, understand the direction of travel, and making sure that you help clients even better. So, what are the kind of things that you've observed over the decades?
So the clients, like I said earlier, one of the things that we realize now is that we no longer have to preach this. The clients are now coming to us and saying, we know we need to do this. How do we get better at this? How do we execute on one of these strategies and get there? But some of the smarter ones are realizing that this is in some ways a mechanism to attract talent, right? So you wouldn't think that history would be a talent attraction mechanism, but think about if you look at the replacement rate, if you just look at just how many children, right, your society needs to have to replace the workers that are retiring, whatever the developed countries means, they're below that replacement rate. which means that you're going to have fewer workers to replace the ones that are retiring, which means that you're going to have a higher level of competition for that workforce that is coming at you. And the question is, do you look attractive enough to bring the talent in that you want? So on one hand, you know, the young engineer, right, who has grown up with access to data at their fingertips, you know, they pray to the Google God. The Google God responds with 3.4 million answers in a few milliseconds. And, you know, it's all biased because it knows your search patterns, and boy, that God knows me, loves me, and just gives me all the answers that I need. So they're accustomed to information at their fingertips. They show up at an organization, and one organization has the data. One organization says, we have the historical data, it's readily accessible, you can make great decisions based on the history because you don't know anything about our company, but I'm asking you to make decisions, and how do you make blind decisions, right? The other company they're looking at is back to that paper world. They still have Excel spreadsheets floating around. Somebody says, you ask the question, can you show me your historical data? And everybody stares at their shoes, right? And so as a prospect, a young engineer coming out of school, where do you go? Do you go to the place that is going to set you up for success? Or do you go to the place where you're going to have to fight to figure out what actually happened, right? It's a pretty easy decision for a recruit to know that they're going to be successful in one place versus another. The other and matching criteria that we see organizations recognize is that that talent pool that they're bringing in doesn't stay that long. What does that mean? If you look at the trends from boomers all the way through Gen Zs and all that, millennials, boomers tend to stay about 10 years in their jobs, right? If you flip that and you look at the younger 25 to 34 range, it's less than 3 years, right? It's a more transitory workforce. What does that mean as an owner, right? So the people that I hire are not going to stay with me as long as the people that I used to hire. As they come in and they leave, so does the historical knowledge. And I'm going to replace those people with new people that are going to stay 3 years. So where does the knowledge, you know, transfer occur, right? It's very difficult to expect someone within 3 years to sit on the front lines and make $100 million bets for you. That's a very risky proposition. Typically, it takes a decade or more growing people into those shoes to be able to say, yeah, we're going to rely on Andrew, and he's going to put a proposal out there, you know, a bid for $100 million, and we're going to make money doing this. Right? That's a long-term process, and so you have to try to keep people. Well, if your workforce is leaving after 3 years or 4 years or 5 years, and it takes you 10 to grow them into the caliber of person that you want, fundamentally the math doesn't work out. So you have to offset, you know, that trend with data and tools and technology, and empower those people with more. So we see organizations realize that data plays a role in that strategic decision around staffing and labor shortage and all that. The US is experiencing tremendous labor shortages, both in the field and in the office, and the talent pool is smaller, and so then everybody's going after the same resources, and they're stealing them, and they're paying them up. And so, you know, even if you're not a senior person that's been there 10 years, they may be a very attractive candidate for another company that needs to fill a spot because somebody else retired, and they need that senior role, and they'll pay up for that person. Well, then once you lose that person, are you going to replace them with somebody junior? Maybe, but then that junior person just has no experience, right? Very talented, very smart, very capable, but they don't have the experience, and there is no substitute for experience, right? You can't just sort of make that up.
So Nick, I mean, in addition, so I was going to say, in addition to that kind of demographic shift that you're seeing in the market, how would you kind of summarize other changes you've seen in the kind of construction sector in the decades you've been going, and at the risk of getting your crystal ball out, how do you see the market changing in the next decade or 5-10 years?
Well, so let's put our technical hat on then and talk about, you know, the magic of AI, right? Artificial intelligence, right? And we'll take a subset of AI and machine learning and making smarter machines to make smarter predictions. So You have all of this technology becoming more and more available in the AEC market, in the general market itself,
Yeah.
right? Most of these ML models are actually available. You don't have to invent the models anymore. Those models are actually readily available. So what you're going to start to see is rapid development environments around AI coming at you. And so the idea of AI as a part of a solution is going to become more prevalent going forward. That's an easy prediction. You're starting to see that in the space, and that's not, there's no rocket science there. It's coming. One thing we know about, machine learning is that it requires a lot of data. It requires a lot of data in order to see the patterns and make the predictions in such a way that you can feed it, sample data and test data. You can test your models, you can refine your models, feed it new data, continue to refine that again and again and again so it can start to make better predictions for you. Well, that's a tough journey to get enough data to feed the model with enough examples in order for it to make a reasonable prediction for you. Right? So if you wait until AI is quote unquote available and prevalent, you're years from getting enough data to then feed the machine in order for it to make the great prediction for you. So the smart ones are saying, we know AI is coming. We know this advanced technology is going to be available to us to help us make predictions and all the kinds of things that the machine learning will do for us. But we need data. We need to get our data house in order to be able to feed this machine in order for it to help us make these predictions. So the smart ones are, well down that journey because they know it's a data-driven process, and if they don't start now, they'll just be that much further behind when they want to implement that technology.
And Nick, in what's a very kind of competitive sector normally, do you see any kind of behavioral shift in people understanding perhaps it might be worth pooling data and actually getting that bigger data set by actually, almost, as I say, having a data pool across the sector?
Well, I mean, I'll use the UK's example of the BCIS, right, as a way to pool data. What we find, at least in the US, is that contractors simply won't do it. They are radically against the idea of sharing because the margins are so thin, because they're so desperate for an edge against their other contractor competitors. They don't want those numbers going out. That's a really tough sell to the contracting market. It's an easier sell to, say, the owners, right, who aren't necessarily as competitive, and they will be willing to share data. So we do see some of our utility clients willing to share data. Like for like type owners are willing to share data more readily. We do find that we have clients who are cost consultants, and those cost consultants are aggregating data from multiple owner clients, and they leverage our technology for the purposes of, let's call it, external benchmarking. The ability for a client to look towards a collective market set of data in order to measure, benchmark whatever they want to do. That's where we see that going. But in the US, we just don't have a BCIS like you do in the UK to aggregate that across multiple sources. Some are doing it here and there, but it's not widespread.
Indeed. So I guess the final question, given the dynamics that we've talked through, what's your roadmap look like in terms of additional function and value that you're going to put into your solutions?
It's always way more ideas than capacity to build. How's that? So, the staff is great. We just work with great people here, and so we're very fortunate. We're on our third generation of this strategy for project history, and as part of that, we're building a predictive modeling solution. It uses both parametric technology. It uses the concept of analogous estimating. It uses stochastics as a means to pull this in. There's a fair amount of advanced mathematics that we're going to be building into it. We're shooting for the stars, on this one in terms of building a cost model that hasn't been built before, and trying to balance the idea of power and simplicity. We don't need to hire jet fighter pilots to run it, but it's capable of doing things that would have been very difficult for the average person to do. And so from that standpoint, we're trying to get there to go where no man or woman has gone before with cost modeling.
Well,
That's our
that's
objective.
fascinating, and it's been a very, very insightful conversation today. Thank you so much, Nick, and I look forward to catching up again and seeing how you're getting on with your rocket science.
Thank you, Andrew.